Americans for Prosperity North Dakota proudly supported important policy improvements that broke barriers for all North Dakotans this legislative session. From tackling unnecessary and burdensome occupational licensing standards to fighting for tax relief, AFP is proud to have played a part in improving the lives of North Dakotans this year. Join AFP today by visiting www.afpnd.org. This advertisement was paid for by Americans for Prosperity. North Dakota State University professor of psychology and behavioral scientist Clay Routledge joins me. Clay, actually next week, is going to be participating in a discussion at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C., although for those of you, which is pretty much all of you, listening to this in North Dakota, there is going to be a live webcast at the Cato website. If you go to that, I'll try to put up a link to all the information in the notes of the podcast. I think if you go to cato.org/live, you can actually follow the various live streams that they have. But the headline of the event is "The Search for Meaning in the Age of Abundance." And I'm going to read the description of the event. I quote, "We live in an age of unprecedented prosperity. Yet a recent psychological study found that anxiety is, quote, significantly more prevalent and impairing in high-income countries than in low- or middle-income countries." Clay Routledge argues that these and related research findings are a warning that the prosperous societies, such as the United States, are facing a crisis of meaning that may ultimately undermine liberty and prosperity. Affluence and liberalism, he claims, benefit humanity by reducing material concerns and liberating individuals to pursue their goals. At the same time, however, affluence and liberalism uproot individuals from traditional sources of meaning like religion and interdependent communities. He says that people who are uprooted from traditional sources of existential security can become psychologically vulnerable and anxious, demotivated and pessimistic, and attracted to extreme and dangerous secular ideologies, which all threaten the sustainability of a free and flourishing society. That's a lot. Can you give us some examples? Put some meat on those bones for us.
Okay, so if you look at a lot of survey data from a wide range of outlets like Pew Research, or even Cato's got some new data that just came out, you can see a number of indicators in which, despite the fact that we are arguably the safest and wealthiest, most prosperous country in the history of the face of this planet, that there are all these warning signs about our social and psychological health. So, for instance, something around the range of 20% of millennials say they are lonely most of the time or all the time. And, about a quarter of millennials indicate having no good or best friends. So that's kind of an indicator of social health. We've seen anxiety rates increasing, and even though a lot of people like to point to things like, well, this is a Trump thing, that, our society's gotten, less healthy, or people are more stressed out because of Trump, you can look, over the, recent decades and see a much broader trend in terms of, psychological illnesses like depression and anxiety. And these aren't just things that people are saying. I mean, you can look at pharmaceutical prescriptions. So more and more people are taking antidepressants than they used to. More and more people, you can look at book sales. More and more people are buying self-help books related to anxiety and depression. And so and then of course we can get into the suicide statistics and opioid issues and things like that. So there's a whole range of data that suggests that at the same time as we're doing very well in terms of physical comfort, people have nice smartphones and Netflix and cool cars and all these things, there's something that might be missing, or some kind of vulnerability that's more psychological or more social or more cultural.
So that's interesting. I want to, as I'm listening to all of this, I'm thinking of something that I've been talking about in columns and on the podcast. And I don't want to put myself on your level. You're a professional academic. I'm a rodeo clown with a blog. but I do observe a lot of things that are going on in the world. And one thing that I've seen is, one thing that I talk a lot about is outrage culture, right? Which is people just being upset about what I consider to be trivial things. Whether you want to call it cancel culture, we've seen, people upset about a particular movie that's coming out, or people upset, about something that's going on, or what have you. To me, I've always felt a big part of that is, I think part of what you're talking about, which is we have a lot of time on our hands. We are living in a very affluent time in human history. I can go back just a couple of generations to my grandmother and her parents, and they spent most of their time trying to make a living, like most Americans did. I mean, most Americans at that age were farmers. It's kind of amazing. I saw this chart. It was a GIF a while back, and it was like the most common profession in each of the states. And up until about starting maybe in the 50s and 60s, it was farmer. Right? So most people were engaged in just sun up to sundown, trying to grow enough food to survive and sell enough to prosper. That's most of human history. And now suddenly, we're in a very affluent era. And I think because we're not so consumed with just the day-to-day act of survival, I mean, it's a good thing, like you mentioned. It opens the door to a lot of other things that aren't necessarily directly tied to just economic or physical survival. Things like art and culture and everything else, but also it leaves us open to worry about a lot of things. I probably sound dumb compared to what you're working on, but does that make sense? I mean, am I even on the right path there?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And if you look at international data, you'll see a story consistent with that. For instance, even though the Western countries like the U.S. tend to score higher in measures of happiness than countries in the developing world, it's those countries that score higher on perceptions of meaning in life. Now, some of that can be explained by religiosity, that the people in the developing world are more religious than people in the West, and we're increasingly secular, as you know. But even controlling for religiosity, you can see these differences. Another interesting, dimension of this is there's pretty good data showing that the more conservative people are, the more they report their lives as meaningful, and that this effect remains even when you statistically control for the fact that conservatives tend to be more religious. And part of the answer seems to get at, perhaps in a different way than you're saying, but get at the issue I think you're hitting on, which is the strongest predictor of meaning in life is the feeling that one matters, that one has an important role in society. And in the examples you provided about our agricultural past, or just people having to work more, life might have been hard, but you knew that your family, your community depended on you, that you had a role for survival and for the functioning, right? So the more affluent a society is, interestingly, the less an individual matters, right? Like if a robot can do your job, then you don't really matter. And you see this. You see that more and more young people and more people who, by many indicators are doing very well, feel like they're really not that important. We have more and more people that are, staying single longer, putting off getting married or starting families. We have more people that aren't joining in community organizations and churches and, also, secular civic organizations, where they could get that sense that, people need me, I matter. And so I do think there is this interesting paradox by the more we make a society comfortable and prosperous and can kind of offload a lot of work, so we don't have to do it anymore, so we have more free time, the harder it is for us to see our role in that, that we actually matter in society.
Is it kind of, obviously, I have children. I have a college-age daughter now. I went through it myself. I had friends who went through it. There's kind of a hangover after high school, right? Where you have a group of friends, depending on your situation, you may have been attending one school or another with these people since kindergarten, all the way up through high school. It's a group of friends, and then suddenly you graduate and you don't have that impetus of, legally mandated school attendance to bring you all together every day. Everybody just kind of goes out into their own world, and a lot of people can end up feeling lonely. Like if you don't find a new thing to fill those relationships with, or fill those gaps where those relationships left, or find a way to maintain those relationships, you could find yourself very easily lost after high school. I think that's not at all an uncommon phenomena. And I wonder if this is just happening on a larger grand scale, where because we don't have the need to work so much, we don't have that impetus to go out into the world as much as we once did and interact with other people, which then, has sort of a domino effect, which leads to other things, like maybe you join a social club or what have you. And it's been interesting. And like you said, I think it's been going on for a long time, because I look at the decline of groups like the Elks, right? And the Moose and the Masons. I mean, these used to be very, 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 very active organizations. And you look now, their memberships are very old. They've been shrinking for a long time now. This isn't a Trump era thing. I'm not even sure this is a digital era thing. There's something larger going on.
Yeah. I think you're right, and it is, and the something larger going on is important, and it also makes it hard for people to see, because you do have to. Things happen. Culture changes very slowly, and you have to look beyond. I mean, you can see dramatic changes when there are dramatic shifts, like when the internet was changed a lot, perhaps. But you can go back before that, as you're suggesting. You can see, a slow-moving cultural change towards, this is what I argue when I kind of point the finger at liberalism, for lack of a better way of saying. I'm not really trying to make a political point. I'm not saying this is like a liberal thing. I'm talking about this idea of liberal individualism, that the movement that started centuries ago of focusing people more on their individual interests and goals and freedoms, which in many ways is excellent, right? It's great. I'm not, I'm a fan of. You're
using liberal, not in sort of not out of our maybe sort of modern political lexicon, but more sort of the classical liberal. As in, if I were to describe a society as a liberal society, that would be as opposed to like an authoritarian society, like the United States of America. Whether we have Republicans in charge at the moment or Democrats in charge, is generally a liberal society, because most Americans, within the confines of some laws, can go out and do what they want, as opposed to an authoritarian society like what we might see in a place like China or North Korea, where you don't have the same level of. So that's the sense of liberalism you're talking about, not in the sense that
definitely
not ideologically so much.
Which I think most of us like.
Right.
At some level, we like freedom, and but there's this, and this is one of the big issues I'm going to discuss at Cato. There's this interesting balancing act, I think, that has to be maintained to sustain a free society. And on the one hand, I think a lot of us who are, sort of libertarian-minded people are good about thinking about all the ways that authoritarian countries and, large government can oppress people, can threaten freedom, can undermine freedom. And people we want to be self-determined, right? We don't like being dominated or controlled or oppressed. And so I think we're pretty good about thinking about that and pointing out all the ways that the state can be a threat to freedom. But that's only one half of the story, I think, because it's not like if the state disappears and, people are free, all of a sudden freedom is flourishing, right? People are thriving. So there seems to be these bottom-up individual, social, and cultural, kind of scaffolding that helps us regulate ourselves, and it helps make freedom sustainable. And those are the things that, perhaps ironically or paradoxically, might be, kind of unraveling, under our liberal order. So there's this weird balancing act. It's like you don't want to be controlled. I don't want the government to tell me. Like you gave the school example, right? That's great for little kids and make them go to school. But generally speaking, I don't want the government to tell me to join a club or
Right,
join a
yeah.
church or
No. I don't want.
like that, right?
I don't want to have to join the Moose, and force of like some tax penalty or something like that, right?
Right.
All due respect
So
to the
we
Moose,
don't want that.
I'm sure the Fraternal Order of
But
the
we
Moose.
want to be able to. Sorry.
I'm sure the Fraternal Order of the Moose is a fine organization. I'm not picking on them, but I'm just saying I don't want to be forced to be a member.
Yeah. So what we might end up doing, I think, not on purpose by any means, but we might be really good on the one hand of demanding freedom,
yeah,
but not so good at attending to, the more organic, cultural and social forces that help freedom thrive.
Is it just that things have moved so fast? Because again, I can remember my grandmother. I'm not that old. My not so distant relatives lived in a very different time where work just took up an enormous amount of your time. We have gone from that within just a couple of generations to the internet and everything. Like it's changed so quickly, even before the internet. But I would really almost say like post World War II, things in America have changed so quickly. Is it just that society hasn't figured out how to maybe healthily deal with all this new free time? I think we can do it. I just think it's happened so quickly. We just haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, I think that's true, and this is why when I talk about all this research about how religious people have more meaning and people who are integrated into traditional cultural structures have more meaning and all that, I think it's really easy for people to say, "Hey, Clay, you just kind of sound like a cranky old man who's looking to the past, and that's not coming back." But maybe that's my fault, but I think when people think that, they're missing my point, which is just as a historian wouldn't say, "I'm studying history and how things worked because I want to go back to that." They're studying it because there's lessons to learn about the human condition, about what works for people.
Yeah.
And so I totally agree with you. We need to be forward-looking, and we need to figure these things out. And short of some sort of apocalyptic event like we see in the in science fiction, we're not going back to an old agrarian, localist
nor do I want
world.
to. I like what the world has become. I don't want to give up all the wonderful advancements that we've made. I'm very glad that my son, has options that are greater than like farmer, right? And again, all due respect to farming, it's a noble. I know a lot of people who farm. They're happy, good people, not taking away anything like that. But I'm glad we've evolved. I think we just have to figure out how we're going to live in a new society. In the same way that I'm not sure everybody has figured out how to deal yet with the fact that we're chronicling all of our lives like right out in the open on Facebook, and we haven't figured out how to get along with one another yet on Facebook and Twitter and everything else. That's a self-evident truth of 2019 in the United States of America and the world. And much as that, I think we also have to figure out what to do with our free time. And, as I was preparing for our interview today, I actually ran across a New York Times article that made me think of exactly the thing that you're talking about. And it was about the revival of the supper club, right? And you think about the supper club like from a past age, particularly a Midwestern thing where people would go, and it was like a very lengthy experience. It wasn't just you went and loaded up on food and left like you do in a lot of restaurants today. There was like a whole atmosphere to it, right? Like you went and you danced a little bit, you hung out at the bar a little bit, you had appetizers. Like it was a whole evening thing, and people are trying to bring them back. And I just started thinking, that's the sort of thing that could fill those gaps, right? If we brought back that sort of thing where it doesn't just have to be supper clubs, obviously, but church, or just a lot of other things. And I'm saying church, like I'm an atheist, so I'm not even necessarily, I don't have a dog in that fight if people go into church or not, but I'm just saying, I think we need to find new things to do with our time, and maybe some old things that we used to do could become new again and fill those gaps.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's why I also think it's really important to study. Of course, I'm biased because this is some of the stuff I do study.
Yeah, well.
Of what the core ingredients of those things are, right? So it might be, like you said, there might be a revival of new ways of doing these old things, but what are the fundamentals that make them work?
Yeah.
And one thing that we seem to have good data on, I think, is, this point I was making, that it has something to do with you, with you mattering to people, like you feeling like people depend on you. And so this is one of the reasons I'm kind of critical of this, kind of safe space culture that you often see, which is well intentioned, I think, of let's focus on everyone being really kind to each other and never hurting anyone's feelings. And I think we would all agree, like, bullying's bad. You shouldn't pick on people, and there's such a thing as being a decent, polite human being. But I think what's often lost in these movements, particularly the ones I see in academia, is they're mistaking politeness for actually taking care of each other, and for actually having a moral duty to to other people. And so you can have, in fact, it's documented in the research that you can have people that are surrounded by nice people who still feel extremely alienated and lonely, right? Yeah. So it isn't enough just to have a society where, this kind of politically correct society where we're all, sensitive to each other and, don't hurt each other's feelings. People really need to have deeper bonds. They really need to feel,
you have to feel some ownership.
Like they matter.
I think you have to have some ownership in society. And that's one thing that I feel with people tearing down the idea. I mean, I don't have a problem with people being critical of the United States of America. I mean, our country's made plenty of mistakes. We are far from perfect. But I think if you tear down that idea of patriotism to a point, you lose ownership. People don't feel like they're a part of it. If you don't feel like you're a part of it, then I think a lot of what the success of the American form of government is built on starts to decay. I think of all the times you hear about these like bike share programs in these cities where, they have these bikes laying around and they belong to everybody, and like, a couple of months later, all the bikes are destroyed and everything because something that belongs to everybody belongs to nobody. And I think it's very important for people to feel that connection of, I am a part, like what you're saying, I am a part of this, or I own a part of this, or I'm responsible for a part of this, I'm accountable for a part of this, people are depending on me. We're missing in that a lot of ways. I think some, as a conservative, I would argue some of it's been supplanted by government. We have government doing a lot of things that maybe private organizations did in the past. And I think that's supplanted a lot of those feelings of ownership and possession in our society. Last thought, Steele.
Yeah, no, I generally I agree with that point. I mean, if people don't have any skin in the game, so to speak, then again, it's another indicator that, well, they don't really matter. So if the government can do everything, then I don't have to do anything. And if I don't have to do anything, what good am I? Who am I? And then I think this encourages what we're seeing, which is when people feel like they don't have meaning, like they're not really important, it turns, it can do one of two things. For a lot of people, it turns them inward into becoming more hedonistic, more pleasure-oriented, that, well, I should just focus on what makes me feel good. People become more nihilistic, they have a sense of hopelessness. But it can also turn people outwards. It can make them sort of angry and long for meaning in ways that they're clinging to authoritarian ideas, which is, again, a threat to freedom.
I agree. Well, the event is, again, it's going to be on October 14th, next week. It'll be 11 a.m. to 12:30 Eastern Time, so I suppose that's 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Central Time. If you want to stream it live, it's www.cato.org/live. Once again, www.cato.org/live, and I'll try to put that link in, too, if you want to watch it. Clay, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always great to talk with you, Rob.